much. Thank you very much, Heriberto and Yuri, for this wonderful reading. And now we're going to have a brief conversation. I would like to start by asking you how important it is for you to be translated into other languages. You know that English is the language into which foreign publications account for the smaller percentage of the total books that are in the market. I mean, around 9 or 10% of the books that are available in the United States and in the United Kingdom are translation, and 90% are original works written in English. You know, when one goes through the newspapers of foreign countries, the only news that one can encounter about Mexico are how do you say this? Not at all.
Oh, about violence.
Yes, about violence, and you know, if one travels to other countries, you can still find that the Mexican is perceived through these very basic and anachronic stereotypes, and the translation of literary works can play a significant role in fighting, as Martinez would say, the war against cliché. So I would ask you to comment on that, please.
Well, I started to write in English basically because I didn't like what was translated. I was invited, I don't know, like maybe 96, 97 to read in San Diego, Tijuana. So I was invited to read in San Diego, and then I read a poem in Spanish, and some translator friend, some friend in San Diego read the translation into English. And then one more reading about that. And, so after a few readings, I started to feel like nobody obviously understood Spanish at those readings. So I felt like I was a kind of exotic, sounding man. And I don't like that at all. So I started to write in English to have a real communication in California, basically. So my relationship, I am a translator from English to Spanish. I believe in translation, but I also think that translation is basically colonial. I mean, the Mexico and United States relationship is colonial. So I don't believe that much in translation as a tool of communication or as a tool of understanding. I think that translation is done mostly to assert colonial roles and war. Translation is part of our war. I translate from English into Spanish because I have a role in our war. So translation for me is war, like writing. So I don't believe also in changing stereotypes. I mean, I don't identify myself with Mexico or the United States. So I just write in both languages because I have something to say to both audiences, to both readerships. And I even don't feel like if my writing gets into English, most of the meaning gets lost. And if that book in English got translated into Spanish, which somebody did, I didn't like it all, that translation. I think the book would be destroyed because at the level of writing, at the page, where no sound, just the level of writing, I try to codify meanings so the other can decodify meanings. When I read, it's all about like sounds. It's not about codification of meaning on the page, but sounds. So either way, codification is lost from one language to the other, or sounds. So I don't have a response.
Well, yeah, the first thing I would say is that yes, translation is the abstraction of an original object, and we have to assume that every translated book is a new book. A few months ago, I was in a panel in Tulane University with Lisa Dillman, a translator to English of my books. and they asked me if I thought that the translator is a new author, and I think the translator is a new author because the translator is creating new meanings and is creating new sounds, and in effect, it's creating a new whole object. Sometimes it's part of the word, sometimes it's a colonial object, but sometimes it's not like that. It's like any other book that interacts in different ways with different publics and with different cultural fields. Sometimes it can be read like that. It can be read as an object that just confirms certain stereotypes, and sometimes it depends on the kind of reader that put its hands on the book. It can be a totally different object. And well, that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing is that it's strange because when you are translated, you have this sense of personal achievement. Like, oh yeah, I'm being read in some other place. But actually they are reading something else. Who knows what we are reading when we read Dostoevsky, you know? But in other sense, this also can give us some hope, because if we can feel certain emotions reading Dostoevsky or reading Goethe, even if we don't know Russian or German, it means that translation is possible and that we have to keep trying. And well, I am happy about it, and I also I just assume that there are parts of this whole process that I will never be able to know. The books are going to be translated to Finnish and to Hebrew, and I have no idea what they are going to do with the books in those languages. So it's just like the Voyager that you send into space, and something's going to happen somewhere there that you have no idea. But the act of doing it, I think it's for you.
What do you think a Finnish writer, or do you think a Finnish writer will not have at least a vague resemblance of what Mexico looks like by reading Yuri's book? I mean, he's not going to read what Yuri wrote, but if there is a good translator doing the job, he will translate the essence. And I know that you work a lot with images, I know that you are very fond of contemporary art, and that transmission of knowledge, or that transmission of an emotion, or that transmission of an essence can be done in different manners, with different words. The same idea can be portrayed in different ways. So it can be portrayed in the way Yuri wrote it, and maybe with a translator it can be portrayed with different words into the same idea with Finnish words, into a reader in the opposite part of the world. So don't you think a Finnish reader would get to know something about Mexico in a better manner by reading Yuri's book?
I mean, I'm very skeptic about, I mean, because I'm a writer, I believe and I don't believe in language at the same time. I really doubt that cultures understand each other. So there's power relationships always play the biggest role in any relationship. So I think that translation is mostly done for political reasons. I mean, what gets translated into another language is mediated by what we want to achieve portraying that other culture. What's the role we want to give to another culture in our literary market or in our mind. So sometimes that can end up to be an enriching exchange. I think most of the time it's really colonial. I mean, in some way or another. I mean, I'm not saying this about others. I always get involved with what I criticize or don't like. I think we are colonial as translators, and I really don't. I would like to think good things about all kinds of things. I don't.
Okay. Another topic, the border. I know that's probably the topic or the issue that you've covered the most throughout your works. In your second novel, Yuri, the border plays a very significant role. About a month ago, I was on a table with 3 writers from Coahuila. Coahuila is state that borders the United States. And there are at least 3 important writers right now in the Mexican contemporary literature. I'm talking about Herrera, Carlos Velázquez, and Luis Jorge Bon. And they were telling us that the border for the people who live in the northern parts of Mexico is not a fixed line. I mean, the American culture just kind of flows into Mexican territory and influences the people that live in the northern states of Mexico, and the other way around too. So I want to know if you feel that way, that the border, culturally speaking, is not placed where it is geographically speaking.
Oh yeah, I think the borders right now in Mexico City, that's where if you go to the airport in Mexico City, there are American agents all over. Sometimes not, obviously, but so the Garita is not in Tijuana, San Diego. You're going to find agents in Mexico City airport, for example. So the borders, or here is in this street, you find tacos, Spanish is spoken in the kitchen, basically. And so Mexico is here also. Latin America in general is here. So I feel that the borders, we slowly have become a big border world in general. And I think Mexico and the United States have an intense border life, sometimes in denial of it. And precisely, that's why I write, because I find myself in a border or several borders, and languages get mixed, confront each other, and are not only 2, but many, and that situation creates a world that I want to try to explore through sounds, through meanings, through writing, and power, like something. I think it's about like powers. The borders are about like fighting cultures, fighting each other, understanding each other, misunderstanding each other. So I don't think that not just borders get to the others. I mean, not that one culture gets to the other side of Mexico, the United States, but I think that we find all kinds of borders in, like here, there's a border. There's a border here, there's a border there. So borders are all over, and maybe we're not so aware of that. So I think the Mexican writers in the north are not that unique. I mean, us are not that unique in being border writers or border something. I think we are all border citizens right now.
Well, I agree with Heriberto's saying, and I remember this phrase I heard once in El Paso, where this guy, this Mexican guy, was saying, "La frontera está ahí donde hay una tortillería." The border is there where you will find a tortilla factory, which is a little bit naive in one sense, in the sense that the border is still a very physical thing with soldiers and walls and fences. But in other sense, it's exactly like Heriberto is saying, that the border is like this kind of laboratory where identities are challenged, where languages are challenged. And the whole idea of a border as a line that separates 2 homogeneous, stable places or cultures of languages is not valid. If it was valid at some time, when we think about what was the border between the Muslims and the Christians in what now is Spain, it wasn't one single line stable, but it was the concept of border is something that defines a process, like something that kept changing throughout the centuries and creating these cultures that then afterwards thought of themselves as stable, as rigid, but actually they were something dynamic. So I think that yes, right now, with the immigration as one of the most important experiences of our time, the whole idea of a border as a fixed place, I think it makes no more sense beyond what I said before, beyond this the border as a physical, militarized place. But you will find in every major city in the United States these inner borders in which you have the different cultures interacting, influencing each other, and misunderstanding each other also. I would say.
One question for you, Yuri. I know that at the University of New Orleans you've been teaching courses where you put American students to read Mexican contemporary literature. I want to know, how has that been? I mean, tell us a little bit about that experience, because most of the literature, I wouldn't say all of it, but most of the literature is being built up within a very specific context of like social reality in Mexico. So how do other readers from other parts of the world are reading the literature we are producing?
Well, I teach at the University of Tulane in New Orleans, and one semester I teach in undergrad, and next semester I teach in grad students. And to the undergrad students I teach Mexican cultural stuff, which is not only reading literature, but listening to music, seeing movies, discussing cultural issues, and always comparing with what they understand as Mexican culture. And with the grad students, that was just reading narrative. And there are American students, but I also have a lot of Latin American students. And we started reading some texts that are canonical in the American universities, like Elena Garro, Juan Rulfo, because this is like mandatory. But then I started asking them to read like more recent things. So we've read, for instance, El Complot Mongol by Rafael Bernal, which is like maybe one of the first, we would say detective novel, but it's not exactly that. Novela Negra, Mexicana. And we've read Iris Garcia, which is a writer from Acapulco, and I think she's one of the best writers right now in Mexico. But the book they liked the most was La Marana Negra de la Literatura Rosa by Carlos Velázquez, which is a really cynical, pessimistic, and really funny collection of short stories. And apparently it would have been really difficult for them to appreciate it because he uses a lot of slang from Coahuila, but his writing is so powerful in terms of the rhythm, in terms of the tone, that this led the students, in spite of some problems regarding lexicon. And I think what they liked the most was that he plays a lot with destroying some stereotypes of young. All men in one way or the other end up being lesser men in machista terms, for instance. And sometimes that can also be a caricature. But in general, I think they liked it. And at the end of the course, they were willing to read more recent things beyond the canonical readings that they are supposed to read in the university.
I want to ask you a question, but after the question I'm going to ask you, I would like both of you to please comment briefly on what is like the general aspect. How would you describe the contemporary Mexican literature right now? I mean, I know that it is a very difficult question because most of the labels that we tend to place to the literature are for commercial purposes. So, for marketing, there are marketing tools. But maybe you can tell me, in general, what does it evoke to you when you think of contemporary Mexican literature? But first, I want you to tell me the other way around. You are studying Hispanic literature at Berkeley. I want to know that your teachers. What do you think? What do they think about Mexican literature right now? Do you think they have an accurate? Do they have an accurate knowledge of what is being done in Mexico right now? Are they still trapped like with the older big names like Carlos Fuentes, Octavio Paz? What has been your experience as a student?
Well, I'm not just gonna comment that on my experience in Berkeley, which has been very brief since I was with my experience with American colleagues this side of the border from the last, I don't know, 15 years or so. I think that they have a very good knowledge. They have all the information. I mean, journals, big libraries, the internet. So I think they have all the information. In fact, I think they have more information than Latin America has because we don't have so many big libraries or access to journals, etc. So they have the information. I do think that information is mostly used for colonial purposes. That has been my experience in understanding why do Americans need to have information in South, or Latin America, on other cultures, how they use it, what's the purpose, what's the real purpose, I mean, what's after being educated in Latin America, how do they use that information? I mean, for me, that's the important thing to understand. And at the end of the day, it's about like getting a good position, being a professor at an American university. So it's a continuation of power, like imperial power. Because of the imperialistic structure of the United States, we in American universities can have access to the information bought by imperialistic industry. So I need to come here because the information is here, and that's colonial. So I'm going to use that information in a colonial context. I'm going to get a job at an American university. I'm going to talk about Mexico or Peru or something. I'm going to get money from that. And people in Peru or Mexico are not going to even get the article I wrote for a journal about them, because they have no access to it. So I think that's my maybe somber synthesis of literary knowledge, information, United States, Latin America. I think it's a continuation. There's no difference between us, we in the United States, because I'm here, us in the United States behaving in politics, or behaving differently in literature. I think it's basically the same.
Yuri, you have something to comment on the kind of literature that's being produced right now in Mexico, and besides that, what's your relationship as a writer, as a creator, with other writers in Mexico? Do they influence you? Do you have a dialogue with them? Do you read them constantly?
Well, first thing I would say is that any canonical list of readings is an expression of power that still exists and that will never cease to exist. But we have more powers than, say, like 30 years ago, when these lists were defined by a reduced number of intellectuals. I always think about this struggle that the two most powerful groups in Mexico, and specifically in Mexico City, had. A group around Octavio Paz and Vuelta, and a group around Nexos magazine. It was disguised as a struggle between literary groups, but it was just a struggle between political groups. And they still exist, but we now have a lot of other expressions, and a lot of other groups, and a lot of other influential intellectuals proposing their own canonical lists. So it is really difficult now to say what kind of literature is being made in Mexico. And I think that's good news, that we don't have a mandatory list of what is being done. We have people doing science fiction, which, by the way, is what we are reading this week in my class. We have people doing science fiction, horror, erotic literature, literature about violence, literature about historical books. And I think it's good that we don't have a fixed answer for that. Regarding the other part of the question, well, I've been out of the United States for more than out of Mexico for more than 10 years now. I spent several months every year in Mexico, but I'm really not that much into the Mexican literary field in terms that I see my colleagues only now and then when I'm during the summer in Mexico, sometimes in congresses and festivals, and I have a good relationship. I try as much as I can to read the people that are producing. At the same time, I've read 4 or 5 of Heriberto's books. He writes a lot, so I haven't been able to read all of it. But I try to learn from them.
You, before we came onto the stage, you said that you didn't read a lot of contemporary literature. Mexican literature. But then you said, well, but I have this column in one of the few literary supplements that are still alive in Mexico, and in that space you comment a lot of what goes on in the literary realm, contemporary literary realm. So maybe you can...
Yeah, well, I think, as you might have heard from me, I try to read things politically. So for me, Mexican literature in the last century has been about like the PRI mentality, how the Mexican state. That's why I said something about like the perfect dictatorship. That's how Mexican political regime was defined by Vargas in 92 or 93, something like that. So I think we are now in a new stage, in a new level of the perfect dictatorship. The PRI returned to power. So literature is responding to the return of the PRI. It serves as a forerunner of the return of the PRI. So I think that's the basic like element in producing writing right now there. The decision by Mexican societies how to understand power, how to understand diversity, how to kill diversity. So Mexican literature right now has a form of the return of the PRI, as a renunciation of democracy, of a nihilism about democracy, etc. And I see also like Indian literatures are like taking center stage in poetry. Maybe the most interesting poetry in Mexico, I think, is by Indian writers from the South. I think that's interesting. And that's also the immediate risk of colonialism taking control all over. And women writers are also on the rise. The number of works by women writers is incredible. So I think Mexico City lost some of its power. The North, since the 90s, appears as maybe the center stage of fiction in Mexican literature, with Sada, etc. So there's a change in power. Powers are changing in Mexico right now. So something is changing, and at the same time, there's a big risk of this centralism returning because of the PRI. The PRI is now controlling. It's going to control Mexico as it used to do. I mean, that's part of why I'm also in this side of the border. I want to live in the PRI world again.
Let's hope you don't have to live in the Romney world.
Yeah.
Well, you got a taste of their individual works with the readings. Then after the discussion, I tried for them to speak in a broader, more general way about Mexican literature. Hopefully you got some ideas of what it is being done. I believe, I don't know if you guys agree with me, that we are going in Mexico in terms of the literature that we are writing and reading through a very special moment, through a moment where we have a lot of diversity, as Yuri was saying. We have great writers in many different genres that are being read and translated, not for colonial purposes, throughout the world. And hopefully we have, you can have the curiosity to approach to what's being done in Mexico right now. We have a few minutes left, and I was just wondering if you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask to any of the writers that are beside me.